Welcome to the Fireside Chronicles.
I wasn't supposed to go in the attic closet, but one summer when I was 12, curiosity won. I found a box of letters, carbon copies, the kind you made before photocopiers existed. My grandfather's name was on every page. I didn't understand much back then, but even as a kid, I knew these weren't ordinary letters. They weren't love notes or family stories. They were reports, warnings. He'd written to senators, agencies, even the White House. Dozens of letters, all saying the same thing in different ways. Something isn't what they tell us it is. They said he'd gone mad after the war, that he took his own life in 1958 inside his garage. But years later, during a conversation, something clicked. What if he hadn't gone mad? What if he'd simply seen too much? And someone made sure the story ended there.
Good evening. Welcome to the Fireside Network. Tonight, we reveal the truth behind the Chronicles. This changes everything. Stay with us.
They said my grandfather had an identical twin. I used to think that meant they were the same person twice. But now I think one was the reflection and the other was the truth. When they came back from the war, something was different. Both were sharp, too sharp, the kind of minds that ask questions no one wanted answered. Then, almost overnight, they were both labeled schizophrenic. My grandfather started writing letters. His brother started drinking. They said the brother spent the rest of his life wandering Detroit, chasing ghosts through alleyways and poker tables. But what if he wasn't lost? What if he was hiding? I can't prove it yet, but the handwriting on one of the later letters, it doesn't match my grandfather's anymore. Someone else was still writing. Maybe the twin was keeping the story alive. Or maybe the story was keeping him. Most of his letters were ignored, stamp received, then forgotten. But one day a reply came. No signature, no return address, just a single sheet of paper. It said, "Thank you for your concern. Please refrain from further correspondence." Polite, cold, almost rehearsed. He didn't stop writing though. In fact, that's when the tone of his letters changed. The next one wasn't written in full sentences anymore. Just fragments, coordinates, strange words like Project Candlelight and White Noise Rooms. Then another reply came. This time the ink was faint, almost gray, as if someone wanted it to fade before anyone could read it. It said, "You were not chosen to see." That was the last letter he ever sent before the day in the garage. Or at least, that's what they say. Because decades later, when I looked through the box again, there was one more letter dated after his death.
When love stopped obeying her, Mara did not grieve like ordinary people. She strategized. Mara called Bob the small man with a big appetite. That man had the appetite of a winter bear and the emotional discipline of an unlocked pantry. Mara didn't find a partner. She found storage. For leftovers, for drama, for blame. Still hungry for a woman who only ever fed his delusion.
Between 1957 and 1958, the letter stopped. Not one page, not one word. It was like he vanished from his own handwriting. For months, my grandmother waited for something, anything, to arrive. Then one morning, a single envelope appeared. No stamp, just slid under the door. The paper was the same carbon stock. The typewriter keys struck at the same rhythm. But the tone was different. It started with a line I can't forget. They've started using light. No explanation, no greeting, just coordinates and the phrase Project Candlelight. I asked my father once what that meant. He said, "Your grandfather saw things no one else was meant to see." When I pressed him again, years later, he said something stranger. Maybe the year didn't go missing. Maybe he did. And in that moment, I realized, sometimes it's not the letters that vanish. It's the people who write them. I finally went to Bonnytown, the place where it all ended. I expected silence, a small town frozen in 1958, but people remembered, too clearly. At the diner, an old man said, "You look just like him." I asked who he meant. He didn't answer, just pushed a folded napkin toward me. On it was an address, and 2 dates, The first one matched my grandfather's death certificate. The second, 3 years later. When I found the grave, the dirt looked newer than it should have been, and someone had replaced the headstone. The name was the same, but the inscription wasn't. It no longer said beloved husband. Now it read, return to the light. I asked the local clerk about the change. She looked at me for a long time and said, we don't talk about the second funeral. That's when I realized Bonnytown doesn't bury its dead once, it buries its stories twice. I thought I had read every letter 100 times, but one night I noticed something I'd never seen before. Along the edges of the carbon paper, faint dots, almost invisible. Not ink, pressure marks. I lined them up under a light, and suddenly the margins began to form patterns. Deliberate, rhythmic. Some letters had single dots, others had clusters spaced exactly 13 apart. I compared them side by side and realized they weren't random at all. They were coordinates, each set pointed to a different location. Old military depots, shuttered labs, forgotten rail stations, all within a few hundred miles of Bonnytown. And in the corner of one page, almost erased, was a phrase written by hand. The map isn't on paper. I don't know what he meant, but when I looked at the next letter, the same faint markings appeared again. Only this time they formed a shape, a circle, swallowing its own tail.
I miss my little Marapoo.
You are truly just her loyal servant, Sim.
A dead man knocked on my father's door. The problem wasn't that he looked familiar. It was that he looked exactly like my grandfather, a man who'd been dead for 24 years. He didn't introduce himself. He just walked in, sat at our kitchen table, and started talking like he'd never left the family. His first question chilled my father. Did you ever open the attic box? His second was worse. Are the letters still safe? Then he said something my father could never explain. He wasn't supposed to leave the light. My father said the room felt colder, like the air was listening. When he finally asked, "Who are you?" the visitor smiled my grandfather's exact smile and said, "You know who I am." Then he walked outside and vanished into the street like smoke. The next morning, an envelope appeared on our porch. Inside was a carbon copy letter dated 1958, but the signature at the bottom wasn't my grandfather's, it was mine.
This is the life, right here.
I wasn't supposed to read this letter. At least, that's what the handwriting at the top said. Not for her eyes. It wasn't written by my grandfather, and it wasn't written by my father. It was written in my handwriting. The letter was dated 3 days in the future and somehow burned around the edges, like it had already survived something I hadn't lived through yet. The message was short. Stop looking for the light. The circle opens only once. If you continue, you won't come back the same. Underneath the text, a symbol appeared faintly through the carbon paper. The Ouroboros again, but this time the circle wasn't closed. It had a break in it, a doorway. My grandfather warned about the light. My father warned about the seeds. Now the letter was warning about me. I flipped the page over and froze. There was a fingerprint pressed into the corner, a perfect match to my father's. But the ink was fresh. I shouldn't have had his fingerprint on anything made after he died. That's when I realized something I've been trying not to understand. My grandfather didn't finish the map. My father didn't finish the map. I am the one completing it. The final line on the page was written in a shaky hand I couldn't identify. When the circle breaks, someone must step through. And at the bottom, beneath the signatures of 2 dead men, was my own. Already in place, already drying, already done. The circle didn't close. It opened, and something is waiting on the other side.
When love stopped obeying her, Mara did not grieve like ordinary people. She strategized. Well, Bob hasn't run yet. I've had husbands, fiancés, almost husbands, mistake husbands, and men who should have come with warning labels. She called Bob her last hope, but not with tenderness, with the tone of a woman settling for the only man still standing in the smoke.
My father's cancer left behind a pattern, and it's repeating in me. I found it last night when I finally opened the box of medical files the hospital gave us before he died. Not the paperwork on the outside, the scans buried at the bottom. One image stopped me cold. A CT scan of his abdomen, taken months before he passed. His tumor wasn't random. It curved, it spiraled, into the same exact shape he drew in his journals. The pattern, he said, lives where the seeds go. At first, I thought I was imagining it, until I held the scan up to the light. The spiral matched the map my grandfather left behind. Light, seeds, digestion. 3 generations, 2 deaths, and now a new problem. When I traced the shape with my finger, it lined up perfectly with the ache I've had in my own stomach for the past 3 weeks. The same spot, the same pain. And then I saw the note written on the back of the scan, not in my father's handwriting. He'll find it when he's ready. Underneath it was my grandfather's signature, fresh again.
My father kept a list of things we were never meant to notice. I found it tucked inside one of his old notebooks, not with his journals, but hidden behind the seed catalogs he used to collect. Page after page, he'd written the same things over and over. Names, dates, ingredients, codes I didn't understand. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger. He tracked where our food came from, what disappeared, what quietly changed names, what stopped being available altogether. In the margins, he wrote questions instead of answers. Why do we call this choice? Who decides what grows? What happens when the seed is no longer ours? One line was underlined so hard it tore the page. They aren't feeding us. They're shaping us. I used to think my father was just passionate, curious, maybe a little obsessive. But now I see what he was really doing. He was mapping a system, quietly, patiently. The same way my grandfather mapped light, different language, same warning. At the very back of the ledger, there was a final note. When the body starts to reject the food, it's not failing, it's remembering. That's when I realized something terrifying. My father didn't stop writing because he ran out of things to say. He stopped because his body was already responding. I finally found the room my father warned me about. It wasn't marked on any map. It didn't have a name, just coordinates, hidden in the same spiral my grandfather drew decades earlier. From the outside, the building looked empty. White walls, no windows, no sound. Inside, the air felt wrong, too clean, too still, like nothing was meant to grow there. At the center of the room sat a single metal chair, bolted to the floor. Above it, a light that never flickered. I remembered something my father once said, almost as a joke. If you want to change someone, don't touch their mind. Start with their body. That's when I noticed the markings on the wall. Not words, not symbols, measurements. Height, weight, intake, output, digestion. I backed away from the chair, my stomach tightening for reasons I couldn't explain. And then I saw the final mark, etched deeper than the rest, my grandfather's initials. That's when I understood this wasn't a room for questions, it was a room for processing.
The first thing you learn is to beware of people when they show you who they are.
He didn't come back for my father. He came back for me. I recognized him immediately. Same face, same voice, but younger than he should have been. He stood in the doorway like he'd always been there. I asked him who he was. He didn't answer. He looked at my stomach instead and said, "Your father lasted longer than most." I felt something tighten inside me, not fear, recognition. Before he left, he turned back and said one last thing. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. And then he was gone. But the room felt different after that, like something had been activated.
Lulu, come.
I finally found my father's medical records. Not all of them. Some pages were missing. Some notes were redacted. But what remained told a different story than the one I'd been given. The focus wasn't on pain. It wasn't even on illness. It was on digestion, measurements, absorption, breakdown. Over and over again, I remembered something my father used to say. When I was younger, what we take in matters more than what we think. At the time, I thought he was being philosophical. Now I realize he was being precise. His body noticed the pattern before anyone else did. And once it did, there was no way to unsee it. I received a letter my father could not have written. Same paper, same pressure in the ink. But the date was after he was gone. It wasn't long, just one line written carefully. This doesn't end with me. I used to think inheritance was genetic. Something passed through blood. But my grandfather left letters, my father left patterns, and now I'm the one reading what they couldn't finish. That's when I realized something I wasn't ready for. Some things aren't passed down because they're complete. They're passed down because someone has to continue them. I finally saw what connected everything. What my grandfather called light. What my father called seeds. What my body has been trying to tell me. Light doesn't just show you the world. It shapes how you understand it. Seeds don't just grow food, they shape what your body becomes. One enters through the eyes, the other through the stomach. Different doors, same destination. My grandfather saw how information changes people. My father saw how nourishment changes them. I see how both write themselves into the body. That's when I understood why the pattern stopped with me. Not because it was finished, but because recognition is the final stage. Once you can see it, it can no longer move in silence.
When love stopped obeying her, Mara did not grieve like ordinary people. She strategized. Mara called Bob the small man with a big appetite.
The door was already open when I arrived. Inside the white room, nothing had changed. The chair still bolted to the floor. The light still too clean, too still. But something had been added. On the seat were three things: my grandfather's compass, my father's ledger, and a single letter with my name written across the front. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what it would say. You don't escape the pattern. You either repeat it or you change what comes after. I stood there longer than I should have, long enough to understand what this was never really about. Not letters, not light, not seeds, but what happens when someone finally sees the system clearly and decides what to do next. I stepped forward, not to disappear, not to surrender, but to choose what the pattern becomes after me. Some patterns aren't meant to be seen. Nothing changed in the room. Same light, same silence. The chair was still there. The air still too clean, too still, like nothing was meant to grow. But something wasn't the same. I wasn't looking at the room anymore. I was seeing it, not as a place, but as a process. That's when it hit me. My grandfather tried to explain it. My father tried to map it, but neither of them stayed long enough to understand what happens after you see it. Because seeing it doesn't remove you from it. It places you inside it. And once you realize that, you don't ask what the pattern is anymore. You ask something else. What happens when it knows you can see it? Start from the beginning, the pattern reveals itself.
Welcome to the Fireside Chronicles.